Imagine standing in front of a mirror, just, looking into your own eyes and suddenly feeling like the person staring back at you is, well, a complete stranger.
Right. It's a completely disorienting feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Or think about your daily routine. You step off the train, walk into your office, and instantly shift your vocabulary, your tone. I mean, even your posture changes.
Oh, absolutely. The entire physical presence shifts.
Right. Then you go home, you call your family, and you slip into an entirely different persona. And somewhere in the middle of that commute, you catch a reflection of yourself in a window and just wonder, wait, which one of these people is the real me?
And that sudden awareness, that realization of your own fragmentation is profound. It's this acute realization that you're navigating the world with a split self.
You feel totally caught between two worlds. So today, we are doing a deep dive into the mechanics of that exact sensation.
Which is such a universal experience, really.
It so is, and we've got an amazing stack of sources today. We are looking at a fascinating blend of stuff from psychological research on belonging by people like Maslow and Baumeister to sociological frameworks.
We've also got some incredible essays on the diaspora experience.
Yeah, and even cultural analyses of immigrant cinema and literature. We're talking Jonas Mekas, Leary. It's a really rich stack.
It really is.
So our mission today is to explore the multifaceted nature of belonging. We want to unpack this concept of the split self and figure out why navigating multiple cultural identities isn't just, a daily struggle.
Right.
Because according to the research, it might actually be this extraordinary cognitive superpower.
I love that framing. Because to understand why feeling like a fragmented self is so painful in the first place, we actually have to look at the baseline of human psychology.
Right, where does it all start?
Well, looking at the research of psychologists like Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary, they establish a baseline truth. The desire for interpersonal attachment, it's not a luxury.
It's not just like, oh, I prefer to be around people I like.
Exactly. It's a fundamental human motivation.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belonging is placed right near the foundation.
Right at the bottom.
Yeah, it's right there alongside biological imperatives like food, water, physical safety.
Because from an evolutionary standpoint, a human being isolated from the tribe was, well, a dead human being.
Wow. Yeah, that's blunt, but true.
Right. We are biologically and psychologically hardwired to require a context where we fit. So belonging functions as a core personality trait. It dictates our entire capacity for social functioning.
And emotional regulation, too, right?
Absolutely. Even physical health. When you know where you belong, your nervous system can actually regulate itself.
That is so wild to think about. And that brings us to the central crisis highlighted in our sources. Like, what happens when that fundamental biological and psychological need is disrupted?
Which is a very real threat for a lot of people.
Yeah. We usually think of this disruption in terms of physical exile. Someone is forcibly removed from their homeland, they pack whatever they can carry, cross a border, start over.
Right, the classic definition of displacement.
Exactly. But the sources draw this crucial distinction between physical exile and what they call psychological exile. And honestly, psychological exile seems so much more insidious.
It really does. Because psychological exile is entirely a state of mind. You can be physically present in a space, you could be sitting in your own living room, right? Surrounded by colleagues you've worked with for a decade.
Yeah.
But emotionally, you are completely adrift. You're disconnected from your environment, and more dangerously, you become disconnected from your own internal narrative.
You just lose the thread of who you are.
Exactly.
It's like the sensation of being completely lost in a crowded room.
Yeah.
Think about how common it is today to just scroll through social media, look at pictures of your own friends, your own neighborhood, your own life.
And you feel totally detached.
Yes. You realize you feel like an anthropologist observing a foreign species. You're just watching a life happen rather than actually living it.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And the irony our sources point out is that in our hyper-connected, constantly broadcasting digital age, this internal displacement is an epidemic.
It's everywhere.
It manifests as this persistent, heavy exhaustion. Like you're constantly wearing a mask just to get through the day. You're questioning your own existence because the person society interacts with just doesn't feel like the person inside your head.
And when human beings experience that kind of profound alienation, our immediate, desperate instinct is to look for a cure.
Right. We want a fix.
We do. We search for a home. We want a definitive place where we can finally just take the mask off, set it on the table, and exist.
Just breathe.
Exactly. But for those who are displaced, whether they're literal immigrants, children of the diaspora, or honestly just people who have outgrown their original social environments, this concept of a true home is incredibly complicated.
So complicated. And I think Jonas Mekas' 1976 epic documentary, Lost, 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 illustrates this complication perfectly.
Well, that film is such a phenomenal example.
It really is. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's this diary-style account of the immigrant experience that captures the raw reality of displacement. The first reels of the film show displaced persons arriving in New York in 1949.
Right.
And you see Mekas and his brother, who were Lithuanian exiles, just wandering these chilly, unforgiving streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan.
And Mekas chronicles the Lithuanian exile community living in Williamsburg during those early, brutal years. That community survived the trauma of displacement by clinging to a very powerful collective coping mechanism.
Which was what?
The absolute certainty that one day they would return to their homeland.
Right.
This is a recognized sociological phenomenon. It's known as the myth of return.
The myth of return, because the film captures the progression of time, and with it, this crushing collective realization that returning is never going to happen.
It's heartbreaking to watch.
It really is. The myth just shatters in real time. They have to resign themselves to the fact that the temporary life they are enduring in Brooklyn is, in fact, their permanent reality.
And that shattering of the myth is vital to understanding the exile's psychology. Angela Pussell writes about this extensively in an essay from our stack regarding the Armenian diaspora.
Oh, I loved her essay.
It's so good. She describes her own family as being trapped in I think she called it a Russian nesting doll of nostalgia.
Yes, that exact phrasing.
Right. So her grandparents longed for a home, her parents inherited that longing, and then she grew up plagued by a desperate homesickness for a land she could barely even comprehend.
Which is wild, right? Homesick for a place you don't even really know.
Exactly. She writes about this intense drive to go back to Armenia to find a single mythical house of belonging.
But the scholar William Safran addresses that exact drive with a pretty brutal truth in the text. He points out that the imagined home country, when you confront it in stark reality, is never quite as good as its imagined form.
No, it really is.
Because the version of home these communities are longing for is frozen in amber. It's a ghost.
That's exactly it. When displaced people actually manage to return to their geographical homeland, they often discover that the culture has moved on without them.
Wow, yeah. The place kept evolving while they were away.
Exactly. Yeah. So the return simply replaces one nostalgia with another. They arrive, they look around, and they experience the terrifying realization that they no longer fit in the place they've spent decades dreaming about.
That has to be devastating.
It is. Which leads to perhaps the most profound paradigm shift in the literature of displacement, the realization that the real home is actually the diaspora itself.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The permanent state of displacement becomes the only authentic home.
That is heavy. So if returning home is a literal myth, how do people map that reality? Like, how do you survive when your home is a permanent state of in-between?
Great question.
Because if we look at the historical record, one of the primary ways human beings cope with living permanently in a divided state is by building that division into their art.
Yes. The media scholar Hamid Naficy coined the term accented cinema to describe this exact coping mechanism.
Accented cinema. I find that term so interesting.
It's brilliant. He argues that films made by exiles, migrants, or people living in the diaspora are marked by a deep double consciousness.
Like a split personality in the movie itself.
Exactly. The split immigrant self doesn't just dictate the plot of the movie, it infiltrates the actual architecture of the film.
So how does that show up on screen?
You see it in the technical choices. Visual doublings, stylistic oppositions, the pacing, even the literal editing techniques. The art itself operates with a split personality, mirroring the minds of the creator.
Okay, but if you want to see what this double consciousness looks like in practice, you don't even need to watch avant-garde documentaries. You can just look at mainstream immigrant literature.
Oh, absolutely. Literature is full of this.
Right. Take Jhumpa Lahiri's novel, The Namesake. The protagonist, Gogol Ganguly, is a Bengali-American boy saddled with the name of a Russian author.
And Gogol's name is a brilliant literary device because it forces the psychological friction right out into the open. It represents a literal daily identity crisis.
Because of his name.
Yeah. Every time someone says his name, he's forced to confront the gap between his parents' heavy cultural expectations, and his own desire to assimilate into American individualism.
Right.
His brain is constantly trying to reconcile these entirely different frameworks.
And sometimes the friction of that split self is so intense that realistic fiction can't even contain it. Like, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni relies on magical realism in The Mistress of Spices.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. The protagonist, Tilo, has this magical ability to manipulate spices, but the spices act as a physical manifestation of her deep cultural roots and the burden of traditional duties.
Yeah, she's literally carrying her culture.
Exactly. And her magic is in direct conflict with her desire to pursue her own happiness in a new Western world. She is crushed under the weight of her heritage while trying to adapt.
And then you have Farhadi Mukherjee, who explores the extreme end of adaptation in her novel Jasmine.
Oh man, Jasmine is intense.
It really is.
Mm.
The protagonist realizes that the only way to chase the American dream is through complete fluid reinvention. She literally sheds identities to survive the trauma of her journey.
She just erases who she was.
Yes. She starts as Jodi in a rural Indian village, renames herself Jane as she navigates undocumented life, and finally becomes Jasmine. Her survival depends on her ability to boot up a new identity whenever the environment demands it.
Okay, hold on, I'm a bit confused. Looking at Gogol agonizing over his name, Tilo suffering for her magic, and Jasmine literally erasing her past identities to survive, it seems like adapting to a new culture requires sacrificing a vital piece of your original self.
I can see why it looks that way.
Because earlier we established that putting on a mask or acting differently around different people is a symptom of psychological exile, and it's emotionally exhausting. But now we are talking about swapping identities to survive.
Right.
How is code switching changing your personality depending on the room you walk into, not just being entirely fake? Is the bicultural person doomed to always be in conflict with themselves?
That's the core question, isn't it? But the sociological and psychological frameworks offer a totally different perspective on that conflict. Conflict is not a mandatory condition of the split self.
It's not.
No. The degree of suffering depends entirely on the mechanics of how an individual integrates those identities. The sociologist Neary Yuval Davis provides a vital framework here. She emphasizes that belonging is not a monolithic concept. It operates simultaneously on different levels.
Okay, let's figure out how those levels actually work.
So Yuval Davis separates belonging into objective social locations and subjective emotional identifications.
Social locations meaning what exactly?
Your social location is how society categorizes you based on external data, your profession, your race, your economic class.
Got it. An emotional identification.
That's the internal narrative you construct about who you are and what you value. The profound friction, that feeling of being fake that you mentioned, happens when the external label society places on you violently clashes with your internal narrative.
Okay. So psychology must have a way to measure the impact of that clash, right?
It does. It's called bicultural identity integration, or BII for short.
Okay.
BII measures whether a person perceives their two cultural identities as compatible or oppositional. A person with low BII feels a massive, unbridgeable distance between their cultures.
So they feel like they're choosing sides.
Exactly. They feel caught in the crossfire of two warring worlds. That is where the agonizing conflict, the exhaustion of the mask, originates.
Makes total sense.
Conversely, a person with high BII views their cultures as complementary.
Yeah.
They don't feel forced to choose an allegiance. They experience a harmonious hybridity.
Right. But for decades, society pushed a model that practically guaranteed low BII. The classic metaphor is the melting pot.
Oh, the melting pot, right?
Assimilation demands that you jump into the pot, melt down your heritage, erase your distinct edges, and blend perfectly into the dominant culture.
Which is incredibly destructive.
Yeah, the psychological research is clear that forced assimilation causes massive psychological distress because it demands the amputation of a person's history.
Yes, amputation is the right word.
But high BII is historically compared to the salad bowl, where the lettuce, tomatoes, and cucumbers are tossed together to make a cohesive whole, but the tomato retains its distinct flavor and structure.
Exactly. But while the salad bowl is a helpful historical metaphor, the cognitive research points to a much more dynamic process than just sitting in a bowl together. Adapting to a context is not the same thing as losing your authentic self.
Let's go back to my pushback about code switching then. I brought up the idea that swapping identities is just being fake, but if we move past the salad bowl and think about it in terms of technology, it makes a lot more sense to me.
Oh, I like where this is going.
The bicultural brain is basically running two entirely different operating systems on the same machine. You have an iOS cultural framework and a Windows cultural framework. Swapping between them doesn't mean the hardware is fake.
That is a brilliant analogy, and the psychological research fully supports that technological analogy. Teresa Laframboise and her colleagues study bicultural competence.
Okay.
They point out that individuals who successfully navigate two cultures aren't being deceptive. They are simply expanding what psychologists call their role repertoire.
Role repertoire. Think about the vocabulary you use on a formal Zoom call with an executive team versus the shorthand you use in a group text with your siblings.
Right, huge difference.
When you switch between those two modes, you aren't being deceitful. That micro shift is your brain utilizing its role repertoire. You are reading the environment and deploying the appropriate social software.
Spot on. Bicultural individuals take that basic human capability and scale it up massively. Having a broad role repertoire means possessing a wider emotional and social vocabulary.
So it's an advantage.
A huge one. You understand the unspoken, deeply nuanced rules of a long, leisurely Spanish sobremesa after a meal, just as intimately as you understand the rigid, hierarchical protocols of a formal London business meeting.
Wow, yeah.
You possess the tools to be authentically effective in entirely different ecosystems.
But how does the brain actually manage that kind of load? I mean, running two operating systems simultaneously must require a massive amount of background processing.
Oh, it requires immense executive function. The brain's command center is working overtime to engage in cultural frame switching.
Frame switching.
Yes, it's constantly reading the room, assessing social cues, inhibiting inappropriate responses from the other culture, and pulling the correct tools from the active cultural toolkit.
That sounds exhausting, but also incredible. The sources mention a cognitive style called naive dialecticism that develops from this heavy executive function. Break that down for me, because it seems like the key to why this is considered a superpower.
Gladly. Naive dialecticism is a concept rooted deeply in East Asian philosophies. Traditional Western thought is heavily categorical and relies on formal logic. Things are generally categorized as black or white, good or bad, true or false.
Very binary.
Exactly. Naive dialecticism, however, is the cognitive ability to comfortably hold two contradictory ideas in your head at the same time, accept that both are true, and understand that reality is in a constant state of flux.
So, to an outside observer who relies on categorical thinking, a bicultural person might just seem inconsistent. Like, they act deferential and quiet with their immigrant parents, but assertive and loud in an American boardroom.
Right, and the observer thinks they don't know who they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in reality, they aren't confused at all. They have the advanced cognitive flexibility to hold entirely different frameworks of behavior in their minds simultaneously without short-circuiting.
Which is an incredible skill. This cognitive flexibility leads directly to what psychologists term integrative complexity.
Integrative complexity. Meaning what?
When you are faced with a complex problem, your brain doesn't just offer you a single culturally mandated path to a solution. Because you have two operating systems, your brain automatically offers you multiple cultural lenses through which to view the issue.
Oh, wow. It's a direct pathway to divergent thinking.
Yeah.
You literally have double the problem-solving tools at your disposal.
Exactly. And when we look at the data on long-term psychological well-being, the payoff for maintaining this complex internal architecture is immense.
The payoff is real.
Very real. The research on the Alternation Model, which is the ability to fluidly and intentionally switch between cultural frames without feeling forced to assimilate, shows overwhelmingly positive outcomes.
That's so encouraging.
People who master their split self report significantly lower anxiety, less depression, and higher overall life satisfaction than those who attempt to fully assimilate and erase their complex past.
That is amazing. The journey we've taken through these sources today completely reframes the narrative of the split self.
It really does turn it upside down.
We started by looking at the painful isolation of psychological exile. We explored the heartbreak of the myth of return and the devastating realization that the home you are longing for no longer exists.
Right.
We saw how the friction of a divided consciousness practically demands to be mapped out in accented cinema and immigrant literature. But ultimately, digging into the sociology and psychology reveals that a fragmented identity isn't broken.
Not at all.
When it's integrated, the bicultural mind demonstrates absolute cognitive brilliance.
Yes. Moving from the despair of feeling like a fragmented exile to the empowerment of possessing an expansive role repertoire changes how you interact with the entire world.
So for you, listening right now, whether you're a literal expatriate living in a foreign country, a child of immigrants trying to honor two heritages, or simply someone who navigates vastly different social and professional worlds every single day, your dual perspective is a massive asset.
A genuine superpower.
The fact that you can read a room, shift your frame of reference, and swap your operating system doesn't mean you are an imposter. It means you are highly evolved and highly adaptive. It only becomes a deficit if you allow the surrounding world to convince you that you are required to choose just one simplified version of yourself.
I think we should leave you with a thought from the Polish-Jewish writer Bruno Schulz, who's featured in our sources on the diaspora.
Oh, yes. Please share that.
Society conditions us to view the exile as a tragic figure, cursed to wander the earth. We picture the displaced person endlessly, mournfully longing for an impossible return to a holy land flowing with milk and honey.
Right, the classic tragedy.
But Schulz completely flips this narrative. He essentially asks, what if the milk and honey abound in exile?
Wow.
What if the ultimate goal of human life is not to finally arrive at a single, unified, easily categorized house of belonging? What if the profound realization we all need to reach is that the liminal space, the messy, vibrant, entirely contradictory intersection of multiple worlds, is exactly where the richest parts of life happen?
Milk and honey in the exile. I love that. So the next time you look in that mirror and wonder who is staring back, or you catch yourself shifting your vocabulary for a different room, don't ask yourself which one is the real you. Realize that every single iteration is you. You aren't wearing a mask, you just have a much bigger canvas. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources, and we invite you to keep exploring the spaces in between.